So what was it then about this particular story that spoke to you as a filmmaker that made you want to make the film?
Well, all right. So I'm from Alabama, and grew up in the era of segregation. And I actually saw the Blind Boys of Alabama, or they've won 5 Grammys now, and they're very famous. But I had never heard of them, you see, because segregation was, the wall was so thick that I didn't know what was happening in the black community, and all these groups were singing all the time when I was a kid, and if I'd been able to hear it, I probably would have loved it. But because my sister basically taught me to love the early black and rock and rollers like Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and Little Richard. I loved all these people, and that was always. And I realized that, and it wasn't until later though I realized that gospel quartets also had a big role in the early development of rock and roll. And I think when I saw the Blind Boys of Alabama in a musical called The Gospel at Colonus, a brilliant piece that combined, Morgan Freeman was in that, this was in the 80s. I saw that in the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I just, when I saw the Blind Boys of Alabama, I don't know, somehow that was a dose of pride as well as just amazement at the music they were making.
Yeah.
And I decided to make a movie about them.
And how long ago was that?
Well, no, actually, it took me a while before I made that decision.
Yeah.
These things germinate, probably 20 years. Anyway, but the thing is, then I was told that someone was already making a movie about the Blind Boys of Alabama. But I didn't realize at that time that everybody's always making a movie about everything. So, the thing is, that movie never got completed, you see. No. So I should have, if I wanted to make the movie, I should have just gone ahead. But anyway, it turned out that the more I explored the whole subject matter and saw all the rest of the groups and the whole context and how it also related to the African-American struggle in the 20th century, and it was all tied together.
Yeah.
I sort of saw a more ambitious project, and in fact, how they got over has 3 meanings, really. First of all, these guys that were kind of born in poverty, had no jobs to speak of in the 20s and 30s, had nothing they could do that had any meaning or you could say dignity. And suddenly radio and records came along in the 20s, and suddenly they saw an opportunity out there to maybe do something that, to sing.
Yeah.
They wouldn't make much money, but they did make enough to travel what they call the Chitlin circuit, and they would get on the radio station locally, and then they may play this in high schools and churches for not very much money, but it was great fun, first of all. It was dignity, and they really became the rock and roll stars of the era, to tell you the truth, and all that came with it. I mean, the thing is, a lot of them weren't necessarily religious, but there was an opportunity to sing. And to sing before an audience, and that's what the audiences wanted at that time, So, and they were some of the greatest lead singers were singing gospel. I mean, like Sam Cooke, of course, and Lou Rawls, and later Wilson Pickett, and one of the Temptations is in the film, Dennis Edwards. And so, anyway, but I guess, what was your question again?
Sorry, so I just said, what was it about this particular story that spoke to you as a filmmaker?
Oh, okay. Well, I think, once again, it goes back to my roots in Alabama.
Right.
And the experience of being in that state at that time. I think you were sort of angry. At the same time, you were separated from this other culture, which now, in later years, I've tried to learn more about and to appreciate. And to tell that story. I mean, most of my films are set in the South or about Southern culture. So this is one important aspect of it that I wanted to tell them.
And you mentioned you managed to get one of the Temptations in the film just then?
Yeah, Dennis Edwards was called the 6th Temptation. He took the place of David Ruffin, who was the original lead singer, My Girl, and those songs. And Dennis Edwards the Temptations were basically all from Alabama, except for David Ruffin. But so, he came on, and he was in a gospel group before he...
How did you manage to get him on board for the film, though? Did you just go up to him and say, hey, do you want to be in my film?
No, I had to chase these people down. It took a long time. As a matter of fact, it took over 10 years to get all these interviews done, and I would say that 75% of them are now gone. They've passed away in the meantime, because these people were singing in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and so that was it. So I was very fortunate to be able to get them on camera, and they were all wonderful. They were just wonderful.
And what would you say you're proudest of on this particular production?
Oh, the proudest. Okay. Well, I think that finishing it, I guess.
Finishing it, 10 years.
I mean, any filmmaker would say that. I mean, Like you said, I mean, and someone else said in the previous panel, no, it requires an incredible amount of determination to get a film financed or completed. But also, I think certainly when it's not a scripted film, it's a documentary, you're always searching for the story.
Yeah.
You're searching for what really is at the core of the story. And it doesn't always jump out in the beginning. I mean, unless you have a very simple, could be a very simple story about one person or something. But in my case, I was trying to do all these different groups, how they crossed over into secular music. You know, and also the aspect of the story having to do with Jim Crow and the fact that they were always harassed on the highway by cops. They were pulled over for no reason, given tickets, put in jail. You know, they had to put up with this throughout their lives.
So how much of the film, I mean, I must confess I've not seen it yet, how much of the film touches on those old, well, discriminatory laws? Like, is it?
Well, I didn't really want to focus on that. I think it's important because that kind of led up to the whole thing that at some point they crossed over in the sense of white people started appreciating black music. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people, and I'm not the only one who believes that music really was one way that kind of brought the races together. Right. Because it really the black music was accepted, it was a big, you know, and it became the inspiration for white rock and roll, and I think it just was a unifying force because as someone says, that music is a beautiful thing that really does bring people together, and I think that's what happened with this too. Yeah.
Such a nice sentiment. Lovely.
True enough.
Yeah, so you know, you just mentioned then that there's a long-term gestating in your mind, 10 years. Yeah. What were the major difficulties during the making of the film? Well,
there's always the funding difficulty, of course. I mean, getting the money for any kind of documentary film. I think that the difficulties were locating people that I wanted to interview and getting them to accept the invitation. I think really it was, as I said before, finding the story and finding the structure, because there's so many things in the film, so many elements, and trying to tell it cohesively without a narrator. I don't believe in a voiceover narration. I don't do that because that's kind of a way you can connect the dots if you need to. So I didn't want to do that. So it was all about just composing the film so that in the end people would get something out of it, and you know.
And was there any particular moment where you found that story beat at the heart of it, or were you just searching for it all the way through? How did it work?
Well, I don't know. You know, I've had some collaborators, of course, who really helped me with this. They're not here today, but they knew really a lot more about gospel music than I did, and they provided me an incredible amount of stuff like posters and ticket stubs and all this other stuff, which kind of enlivens the film that way. All this stuff came together gradually, and I forgot your question. I'm sorry.
My question was, how did you find the story at the heart of the
How did I find it? That's probably no answer to that I can give you, really. I mean, it really was trial and error, and having other people. I edited the film myself, but having other people giving me the feedback I needed to see the direction I needed to go. That's all.
Oh, fair enough.
Just it's a collaborative medium. We all know that. Documentary, drama, whatever kind of film it is, it's a collaborative medium. And you need other people to make it finished.
And have you shown it to any gospel choirs yet?
I'm sorry?
Have you shown it to any gospel choirs yet?
Well, we've had some good audiences, black and white, and we had we were at the Rotterdam Film Festival about a year ago, and we had a choir on stage afterwards.
Oh, nice.
It was called the Black Gospel Experience. 90% white, but they were singing gospel music, and they really did a great job. But it was on stage, and it was fabulous. So yeah, they saw it. But other than that, of course, this is gospel quartet, which I always make that point. There's gospel soloists, and there's gospel choirs, and then there were the gospel quartets, which were kind of the most popular form of female and male from the 20s into the 60s. That was the key form of gospel music, and that was where they started adding the guitars and the drums and the bass guitars and the organs and all the other things, and became kind of a full-fledged, almost a James Brown kind of band, or Sly and the Family Stone or someone. But it's funny, at that point, as the film points out, gospel choirs took over, and they became far more popular than gospel quartets. And they say part of it was because the gospel quartets were known, I mean, there was a lot of womanizing or various forms of, they weren't living the life that they were singing about, I think someone said.
Of course, yeah.
But this is true the whole time, really. But anyway, they lost favor. And so they kind of, there's still these groups around, the Soul Stirrers, for instance, and the Dixie Hummingbirds, and the Fairfield Four, who are all in the film. I mean, they're still around with new members. They're kind of keeping the tradition going. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So anyway, going a little bit broader, how are you finding Manchester? You know, it's a very musical town. I mean, we've already discussed this over brunch this morning, but how are you finding Manchester?
Great town. Well, you know, I've always loved England. I mean, I studied English history in college, you know, and I've been over here a number of times. And I even worked at the Cadbury factory in Birmingham.
What?
We call it
Bourneville.
Bourneville for one summer. Yes, it was great. I went all the way from the top to the bottom. It was some kind of it was just a lark. I mean, some guy got me this job. So I came over here, and it was fabulous. No, really. It was just at the point when Cadbury was deciding to do away with all the Quaker being nice to your employees kind of thing. They had some American experts over to show them how to make a profit.
Oh, nice.
And to get rid of, no, they had too many middle managers and all this stuff. And but I saw this is terrible because I really loved being there, and I thought they had a campus. They played rounders at the break, and it was just like idyllic, you know. But then they had the people from America over here.
Then the Americans came over and ruined it.
And they ruined the whole damn thing. You know, I don't know if they did or not, but anyway, that was fun. So I've spent a lot of time in England, I guess you could say. I've always loved it, man.
And one final question, because I believe we're running out of time, and I need to clean up this beer. What advice would you have for prospective filmmakers?
Oh, gosh, that's such a hard question because. I guess the advice simply is to make the right connections with people. You got to be very social and out there to be a filmmaker. I think it's hard to be a shy person and be a filmmaker in a way. You really have to be, first of all, also to be a director, you have to tell people what to do, and you got to be very, very forward and forceful. And so you got to have that kind of personality if you're going to be a director, as opposed to some other crew position. But and also, of course, obviously getting the money. I mean, you spend all your time finding the money and very little time making the movie. So if you're okay with that, cool. I mean, I'm talking about independent filmmakers now.
Course.
I mean, there are others, of course, but if you want to be an independent filmmaker, yes. But the freedom that you have with that type of arrangement is hard to beat.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Bob.